Welcome to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. Every other week, we bring you Catholic teachings and stories of faith from people throughout the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. This is the Gaudium et Spes podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Gaudium et Spes podcast. As you can see, we've got a very special guest here with us today. We've got Father Dennis O'Brien, who is a retired priest here in the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee, but he's not quite retired. I think he's busier now than he ever has been. I've caught glimpses of him saying Mass at St. Rose of Lima. I know he's still involved with the Hispanic ministry at St. John the Evangelist here in Pensacola, and he's doing marriage encounters. And then the most fascinating thing, and the reason why we've got him on the podcast here today, is he recently just completed the 500-mile journey of El Camino de Santiago. So, Father Dennis, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
The retired priest is maybe the least retired profession in the world. I've never known a retired priest who just sits back. I was like, I got nothing to do today.
That's right.
So thanks for being here. We started our podcast, Father, with the first line from the document, which our podcast is named after, Gaudium et Spes, which goes, if I can remember it, the joys and the hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted. These are the joys and the hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. So, as a follower of Christ, Father, what's joys and hopes, griefs and anxieties lately in your life?
I'd say the joys and hopes were my 11 years serving in Ecuador, serving the poor. It changed my priorities as a priest.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you came back as recently as
5 years ago.
5 years ago. Okay, great. Susanne?
Yeah, so, I mean, we're in the Advent season. Mm-hmm. I feel extremely joyous and hopeful for this time, awaiting the birth of Christ. And, I mean, it's just wonderful, Feast of the Immaculate Conception and just everything to look forward to.
Sure.
Family time, it's just full of joy. Mm-hmm. And, I'm just happy. So, how about you?
Well, gosh, great Thanksgiving holiday. Great victory by Florida State over UF. I'll stop right there. I'm not going to go into detail. But
in football only, we won in basketball.
Okay, fair enough. So life's been joyful. I don't share too many griefs, but recently, actually, towards the end of November, one of my favorite, if not my favorite professor of all time from graduate school, and maybe all of my academic my academic time, my time as a student, Professor David L. Schindler of the John Paul Institute for Marriage and Family Studies up in D.C. He passed away at the age of 79, and just kind of one of those things. Some professors you get to know really well personally.
Right. Some
are just inspiring. He was firmly in the inspiring. We didn't, have too many times where he connected on a personal level, but he was just somebody that set your heart on fire when he talked. And I just remember, going into his classes, Faith in American Culture, and a number of other classes, and just kind of had my world totally turned upside down. So he's mourned and loved by many, and probably haven't heard of him, but there's some articles, National Catholic Register featured an obituary for him. But an interesting American theologian. So anyhow, rest in peace, David L. Schindler. But that's what's going on in my life. So anyhow, well, pilgrimages. What do we got here? I mean, so much to talk about. Father Dennis, so you just mentioned serving 11 years down in Ecuador, but you've been a priest of our diocese for a while. So
for 41 years.
41 years is a while. So.
Yeah.
Well, there's a slight connection between missionary work and Santiago de Compostela. In the late 80s, I had this hope and dream that I could be a missionary. So I said to myself, let me start studying Spanish. So I was at Sacred Heart for a while. I was then at Nativity for a while. And I would just take a couple classes a semester. And I had the chance to spend 3 months in Spain to improve my Spanish. And for me, it was kind of a test for me. If I can handle the culture in Spain, a developed country, then that's a good sign that I could probably handle the culture of a developing country. And if I couldn't, then maybe missionary life wasn't for me. And I remember at the time I had an Irish cousin living in Bilbao, as she helped me buy a used car. So I drove around the country visiting different places. And it was a used car, so it broke down a lot. So I knew the names of the parts of the car in Spanish quickly. And I remember going to Santiago de Compostela. So this was 1985. And so I said, oh, they had this pilgrimage. So that thought stuck with me, that maybe one day I could walk this pilgrimage. And because that was when I was like 37, 38. And then what happened was I eventually went down to Ecuador. The first time was 1989. And I joined an organization called the Missionary Society of St. James the Apostle. And you need the permission of your bishop, and you make a commitment for 5 years. And so when I was assigned, I had no assignment. I just went down to Lima, Peru. I wanted some more classes in Spanish. And at the time in Peru, it was a time of terrorism. And my parents were alive then. And they were frightened, whatever country I went to other than the United States. And I knew that they were worried about me being in Peru. There's a city in Peru called Cusco. And the sister city of Cusco in the States is Jersey City. My parents live in Jersey City. So the mayor of Jersey City and his wife went to Cusco for a goodwill visit. And the terrorists sabotaged the train and the wife gets killed.
Oh my goodness.
So what happened was that I was thinking of my parents, they're thinking, gosh, my son's in Peru. So they gave me, the St. James Society gave me a choice. They said they couldn't guarantee that what I requested would be granted, but I had a choice of Ecuador, Peru, or Bolivia. And so I said, for the sake of my parents, I'll ask for Ecuador. If they said no, I'd live in Peru, I would be quite happy. But I just was thinking of my parents and their state of mind. So I asked for Ecuador, and they said, fine, you go to Ecuador. And when I was there, I spent 5 years. And the St. James Society has a great philosophy. You stay in a poor parish until the time when the parishioners can support a local priest. Then you give the parish back to the diocese and you go to a poorer parish. So I was in a parish called Santa Maria Nita for 4 years, and I was with 2 other priests. We had 3 parishes. We lived together, and so my work was in a city and going to the countryside, and I would consider that the best of both worlds, in a city and the countryside. And after 4 years, we realized that this parish can support a local priest. So I went to a parish about 20 minutes away from me, and it was a very poor parish, and the priest wasn't physically well. And I asked him, I said, would you mind if we ask the Archbishop if we can serve in this parish? And he said yes. And so then we went to a parish called Nuestra Señora de Los Angeles, and you think of the city of Los Angeles. So I served there 1 year. I wanted to stay longer, but the commitment was 5 years, and I asked the bishop at the time, can I stay? He goes, no, come back. I go, okay. I said, okay, fine. And and so what happened was I came back, and I stayed in the diocese for 17 years, and I was serving most of Hispanic ministry. And with Bishop Ricard, I was at St. Rosa Lima in Milton, and I was saying, maybe I can go back to South America again. I said, before I get too old. And I asked Bishop Ricard, would you give me permission? And he said, I don't want to let you go, but I won't stop you. Oh. And so, but he said to me too, he said, listen, you might be living in La La Land thinking how great it was in the past. I want you to go down 2 years before this tentative commitment and see if you really want to. So I spent about 6 weeks, 3 weeks in Peru, 3 weeks in Ecuador, and I came back to Bishop Ricard and said yes. So then I went back and I served 6 years. And I I was basically in the same parish that had a parish that was inner city and a parish that was shantytown. And shantytown was it was miserable, not just poor, it was miserable. And it really helped me understand, how does a priest serve the poor, and making that a priority. Mm-hmm. And when you think about the preferential option for the poor, where, everybody needs to be evangelized, everybody needs spiritual attention, but the poorest especially need it more than anybody else because they have no economic support, and many times they are spiritually abandoned because missionary priests go to places that local priests can't because there's no way that they can support themselves. But a missionary priest, we get a stipend. I get a stipend from Boston. And so I didn't have to worry about that. And so I was able to serve and just find out the needs and the desperation of the people. And after 6 years, I was ready to come back. What happened was, in 2015, all of a sudden, it was like, I remember the date, it was November 1st, I had this extreme pain in my knee. I said, what's going on? And eventually I found out because of arthritis I needed knee replacement. And I really had hoped that when I came back in 2017, that I had 3 months planned. I was going to walk El Camino, but I couldn't walk. And so I then scheduled an operation, and then I was looking for a chance to walk El Camino, but it's hard as an active priest to take off 40 days. Mm-hmm. And also, maybe a younger priest can walk pretty fast. I'm kind of in slow motion gear. When I was walking, younger people would walk past me, and some of the older people would walk past me too. And so I was thinking, I need to walk this out. I'm not getting any younger. So I went to a get-together of former seminarians in Seattle, and I met somebody named George, and that had walked it already, and he and his wife were planning to walk again. So I asked, is it okay if I walked with you? And so he said, yes, let's plan on that. And so I found a friend of mine in Pensacola named Mike, and he joined me. He had a few of his friends, and once every 2 weeks we'd go on FaceTime. We'd ask him questions. He would give us answers. And so then finally it was really going to happen, and so we started this journey. We first flew to Paris, France, but we weren't tourists there. We just stayed in the airport, took a train. We went down to Bordeaux for 2 days, and then we went to a place where he starts, Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, in the foothills of the Pyrenees. And so we spent the night there, and then we started walking. The first day, because we were climbing the Pyrenees mountains, we decided we're only going to walk 5 miles because it was 5 miles uphill. And we were most of us were over the hill group. And so, we were speed demons. And the first day, we were walking through a cloud. So it wasn't raining, but it was wet, walking through a cloud. And up on top of this place called Horizon, where we stayed the night, there was a shelter. They call it an albergue or a hostel. And then from there on, we started then walking greater distances. It's 500 miles, so on the average it's 12 and a half miles a day. So we had to gauge ourselves. And at the beginning, it was very hot, and we drank a lot of water. But also we said maybe we could start earlier where it's not so hard so we could finish around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Basically, it's the routine's the same. You walk 5 or 6 hours. You only bring one extra set of clothing. So every day you're washing clothes, and then I would be working on a little blog once a week, and then and then just plan for the next day.
Wow.
Father, if we could just if we could just for our listeners who are maybe unacquainted with the Camino, because I think I remember somebody maybe 10 or 15 years ago talking about the Camino for the first time. It was like, like the car, like the
Right.
El Camino Chevrolet car, and like no, it's like the most amazing pilgrimage you
Yeah.
can ever do in your lifetime. And just some back, so it's the pilgrimage to the tomb of Saint James, which
Right.
is kind of the connection between the missionary society.
Right. In the Middle Ages, there are three main pilgrimages: Rome, the Holy Land, and a city called Santiago de Compostela in Spain, where they believe the remains of St. James the Apostle are. And they started this pilgrimage in the year 950.
Okay.
And so people would be walking, and then they'd set up places where they could stay the night, and basically people would come for go on the pilgrimage for many reasons. Some they experienced some sadness. There maybe a spouse has passed away. They want to do it in memory of the spouse. Maybe they're going through a different stage in life. They're making a transition. But basically, when you think about it, and I'm not original about this, but life is a pilgrimage. Whether we walk El Camino, and El Camino means the way, and a lot of people also were talking about the movie The Way. And apparently that spurred interest in people walking it too. And so people would walk the way, and you'd go through towns that are hundreds of years old, quaint little towns, small little towns too. Stone buildings, so many stone buildings. We walked through miles and miles of farm, and you see the grapes in Rioja where they make wine. You see fields and fields of sunflowers, but the best part really was meeting the people. The people were from different continents. Very few spoke Spanish, but they had one phrase that they'd say to each other: "Buen camino." May you have a good way, a good trip, a good travel. And so it was a greeting everybody to say to each other, at least for the first time. So you have people from Korea, people from Australia, from South America, France, Germany, Italy, some Scandinavian countries, and basically, and there was a friendliness. It's a very safe pilgrimage too. But you see hundreds of people every day. When we started at the end of August, which meant that a lot of the students were going back to the university, so it wasn't that crowded. But there were crowds. There were crowds there, and what I would do is I would try to celebrate Mass, either on Saturday, mostly on Saturdays, and sometimes I would be able to get the keys for a chapel or a church. They have a priest shortage there too. Little towns don't have Mass, or they have Mass at a time that was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're leaving at 6 in the morning. So I would get the key to the church and celebrate Mass and invite people in the hostel. Anybody want to go to Mass, please come. So it'd be people from different countries. I said, I'll celebrate the Mass in English and in Spanish.
Wow.
Or one time we had some Italians. I said, okay, I asked one of the Italians to do a scripture reading. And I said, it'll still be in Spanish or English, But we had, people from South America come. And so it was I would do that. Sometimes I couldn't get a chapel, so I'd have an outdoor Mass. But one of the things they had, so I was able to get to a church in town, I believe it's called Gaudium, and they had Mass, and the pastor was very hospitable. I said, may I celebrate Mass? And he said, of course. And they had a blessing of pilgrims. And I would consider it an ecumenical gesture where people of all faiths can come if they want God's blessing. So at the end of Mass, they would come and there would be some prayers, and then the priest would make the sign of the cross on the foreheads of each person. And I saw the pilgrims, those who walked there were called pilgrims, that they were just so delighted just to receive, whether they're Catholic or not, just to have that. And also, you might say the Mass that was more glorious or more memorable would be at the cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. And they have in English, it's a technical word called thurible. It's what they use at Mass. They put incense in. They may call it incenser. And they call it a botafumeiro. It's gigantic. Mm-hmm. It takes 8 men to swing it. and so they swung it back and forth. And it was impressive. And they would have 4 masses a day, and they'd be packed with pilgrims.
Wow.
And they would also have a simpler blessing of pilgrims. Mm. But so I was able to celebrate Mass twice at the Cathedral Santiago de Compostela. What we did too is that there was a little bit of time left, and we went to the end of the world. And there's a town called Finisterre, and it means end of earth. And we didn't walk it, though. We did our 500 miles, but we took a bus. We went first to a town on the Atlantic coast called Murcia, and then we took a taxi to go to Finisterre, and to just see beautiful coastland and stone buildings, stone churches on the coast.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Take us through, what was your daily routine? Did you carry everything? You had to wash clothes every other day. You had to, average 12 and a half miles a day. What time did you wake up? How did you eat? Where did you sleep? Kind of detail us a little bit about the journey itself.
Well, especially at the beginning, because of the heat, we would wake up about 6:30. Mm-hmm. Now, let me describe also the hostels. They have bunk beds. And so I would call a day ahead and said, can we have the low beds? The low beds, not high beds. And those who were 70 or over can get it, but those who weren't, they were on the top beds. And basically, we left about 6:30. At times, it was dark. Mm-hmm. I remember, especially at the end in October, sunrise would be 20 to 9.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we would, we'd have flashlights and start walking. And sometimes it has its problems because sometimes you go off the path and you don't realize it, and because it's so dark. But we had for a good hour or so we would have we use flashlights and walk. We'd look for a place to have a cup of coffee con leche. And it was a good price too. It was €1.50, and maybe a pastry. I mean, so maybe it wasn't the best of eating if you have a pastry, a croissant, or something like that. But we looked for some place that would offer us scrambled eggs and things like that. So we would go for that, and we'd walk a good 2 or 3 hours, and then stop for another coffee con leche, and then we would. There was a very popular meal or say plate would be called tortilla de patata. It's a potato tortilla. It has eggs and potatoes and onions. It was very tasty, so that might be my lunch. And then we'd walk a few more hours, and along the way too, there were in the town center there'd be fountains of water. You just fill up your bottle with water. And so it was potable, it was drinkable, and so that helped us because, especially at the beginning when it was so hot, you had to drink a lot of water. Now, I did carry my bag for the first 250 miles, but what happened was I had blisters on my feet, and I didn't get them the first week, and I did what they said: wear wool socks, but I needed to wear more than that, and so. They weren't healing, so after 250 miles, I said, "Okay, I'll, swallow my pride and pay €5 to have it sent to the next town." Okay. And so that's what I did for the rest. But but when you carry 20. They say 10% of your weight. So for me, 20 pounds, and so I carry that, and you get used to it. But it's 20 more pounds on your back. And my feet did improve after I would ship my bag over there. What they had at night, many of the places had what they call a pilgrim's meal. it was a set price, and you maybe offer 3 options. Maybe it cost you €10 to €12, and you'd have a group. Sometimes it'd be paella, sometimes something else, fish, and so that was pretty reasonable. I'd say more or less, it's if you count spending the time at the hostel, going for a couple café con leches, and a patata, a tortilla de patata, and the pilgrim's meal, about 45 euros a day.
Okay.
So it wasn't that bad. One of the things I learned too was I don't know anything about proper shoes. So I went to a running store, because they know more than I do. But I had good shoes, and the shoes were good if you're on flat land, but the soles weren't thick enough, so I'd be walking miles on pebbles. And then when you have blisters too, I go, oh, really? It's excruciating. So if I ever walk again, there's another brand I would get. Yeah.
Father, you were mentioning the ecumenical blessing at the end. I've heard, it's a medieval pilgrimage route that it was, Christians did this,
right.
And then it kind of, I guess it died off for a little bit around the 1670s, 1800s, and then it got rediscovered, and it's become kind of a European or worldwide phenomenon where it's not just Catholics or even Christians doing this.
You're right.
It's just folks looking for kind of a spiritual reboot or something more profound. I don't know if you met anybody like this on the Camino.
That is so true. Some people, from different denominations, they just, this the whole idea of going on a pilgrimage, with developing their relationship with God, and they may not be Catholic, but they're following their traditions, and they believe it helps them in their faith. That they many times they need kind of, it's like going out into the desert in some ways, like the desert experience where you meet God, and I know some people too. They wanted hours to be alone when they walked, because they wanted just to reflect on their relationship with God, or what's going on in their lives. God, please help me in this aspect. Please, or give me an answer. I need an answer. So for them, it was a spiritual quest for so many different denominations. And so they, and I'd find, it's people who go on this so many times. It must have really impacted them spiritually, and they're hoping to get something the second time, and they do. They go a third time, fourth time, fifth time. And it's a whole idea of a pilgrimage. And one sense, you think too, in our tradition and other traditions too, we're all pilgrims on this earth. We're not meant to stay here. Our destiny is to be with God in heaven. So we're all pilgrims. So this is kind of a concrete way of saying that we're all pilgrims walking together.
I just reflecting on how little time I spend walking. I spend most of my time in a car or in a chair, and obviously or my couch or something like that. I don't know. Did you have like a walking routine where you spent miles a day beforehand, or to Ecuador when your time there, people walk often, or was this kind of like a jarring experience?
Well,
on your feet all the time.
I didn't do any walking in Ecuador because it was tropical.
Okay.
But when I came back, I remember the first time. It was 1994, and I was assigned to the Co-Cathedral, which is across the street from Florida State. And I hadn't done any exercise in 5 years, so I said, I'm going to start walking the track. And it was painful for the first month. I would say, let's try a mile. And then I kind of averaged through 4 miles. And I tried doing that, wherever I lived, except in Ecuador. And when I went back the second time, I didn't walk either because it was the tropics. It was just so hot and humid for me. But when I was at St. John's, I would walk with Father John Lecari. We try to walk maybe 4 miles a day. And when I'm at my house in Pace, I would go 4 miles. But I said, if I'm planning this pilgrimage, 4 miles is not enough. So then I started walking 5, and then I'd walk 10 miles, and once in a while 15 miles. And I'd put a backpack on me with 20 bottles of water to be 20 pounds.
Goodness.
And so that to prepare myself for this, it's all good and well, but the only thing, Florida is flat. It's great. I could walk 15 miles, no problem, on flat land, but going up mountains, and also going down. I used the walking sticks. They're helpful, especially going down. And I had a knee replacement, so I said, I don't want to fall. So, I was slow going downhill because I said, because you're going sometimes on rocks and you want to make sure that you don't slip. And so, and I used the walking sticks almost the whole time. It was kind of a good way to keep me in rhythm.
Impressive.
Now, is it something you would ever do again? Or do you have other exciting adventures in your future?
Well, there's a possibility. There's some of my friends that didn't want to walk the entire pilgrimage, so I may walk part of it. There's what a lot of people do, because not many people can get, I said, 40 days. Some would walk the last 100 kilometers. The town where you start is called Sarria, and you walk, it's 100 kilometers, and you walk to Santiago de Compostela. And that can take, depending upon your speed, 6 to 8 days. So I know of one friend said, maybe in a couple of years we'll do that. But the next adventure really for me is a new responsibility I have with Worldwide Marriage Encounter, to be national priest. I found out about it 2 weekends ago. So that's for 3 years. So that's my next adventure.
Yeah. Congratulations
Incredible.
on that. I know, exactly.
For folks who don't, Worldwide Marriage Encounter, guys, the most storied, largest apostolate for marriage enrichment in the whole world. And our very own Father Dennis is going to be the national priest for it, so no small thing, which is very amazing. Another aspect of your ministry has been walking with couples throughout this ministry as well, and guiding them spiritually. So I don't know, you were in a group, you said, with other folks, not just other priests, but lay people as well and stuff?
Well, yeah, I was the only priest.
Okay.
But 2 of them were seminarians, and they realized it wasn't their vocation.
Interesting.
But you talk about like a spiritual aspect of it, and one ex-seminarian said to me, for the longest while, he's trying to find God in whatever happens in his life, whether we consider it positive or negative, painful or joyful. And I said, that's a great way of looking at life. What's happening in my life, to find out how God is in that experience.
I've enjoyed reading your blog. It's www.hikingforchuck.com if you want to check it out. I love the pictures you posted and the stories you had about the people that you encountered, and it was just really enlightening. But Hiking for Chuck, that's in honor of Father Chuck Gallagher, correct?
Yeah, Father Chuck Gallagher was a Jesuit. He was the founder of Worldwide Marriage Encounter.
Okay.
And he passed away some years ago. And I was going to be walking no matter what. And I said, why not make it also a fundraiser for those couples and priests who made a weekend? Because they had this legacy fund, Father Chuck Gallagher Legacy Fund, to raise money, because Worldwide Marriage Encounter has a lot of formation, and the formation includes traveling. It costs money, and right now in the United States, with Worldwide Marriage Encounter, there's English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, Koreans, and also they're starting now Portuguese, the Brazilians, and a few years ago, United States joined with Canada, so you have English-speaking and French-speaking, and also Spanish-speaking up there too. So the Legacy Fund helps in defraying the cost of the formation, where they prepare couples and priests to write their talks, and it's a spiritual formation for them too.
Wow.
Shameless plug. There is a marriage encounter weekend coming up in our diocese, February 11th through 13th in Tallahassee. And some of y'all listening might have already made a weekend. We've had dozens, if not probably hundreds of couples go through Marriage Encounter in our diocese over the years. Some of y'all might have just been through Marriage Prep and have done Engaged Encounter, and Marriage Encounter is kind of the married version of it. But if you're looking, we're talking about time for reflection, getting away, having a little bit of perspective, this is exactly the type of weekend. Over the Newman Center in Tallahassee, just go to Worldwide Marriage Encounter, Google that. I don't have the website memorized. Worldwide Marriage Encounter, and you just click Find a Weekend. And again, Tallahassee, February 11th through 13th. So an amazing opportunity, and all sorts of there's scholarship opportunities, like you mentioned, and stuff. And yeah, so very cool. lastly, I would just say maybe take us through St. James, this preacher of the gospel, and one of the cool things it's like, how did St. James end up in here? Because this is the St. James who gets killed in Jerusalem,
right,
in the book of Acts, and there's a legend that basically angels put him on a boat, take his body to where he had preached the gospel, and stuck him in this little place that got discovered 8 centuries later. This is getting a little detailed, but I remember the first time I was like, what? How did St. James end up there? But just in your own life, in missionary work, in preaching the gospel as a priest and stuff, to doing this pilgrimage to this tomb of one of the apostles, did it give you any perspective, especially at the end of this priestly career?
One blessing was to go to the tomb of one of the 12 apostles.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you go to Rome, you probably be close to the remains of St. Peter. And it's like one of the original 12. It's like, what an honor it is. And also the idea, too, is that all of us who are baptized in Christ are apostles.
Mm-hmm.
And the apostles, after Pentecost, they went off and preached the good news. And we believe that most of them died through martyrdom. And so it's just an honor to be able to go to the cathedral where the remains are. And you would have lines and lines of people just passing through where they see it, because it's a sarcophagus, a very small one in silver, where you pass by the remains of St. James the Apostle. But for me, it's like, what greater honor could I ask for? It's just to see the remains, or be by the remains of one of the apostles, the original 12.
Wow. Well, Father Dennis, thank you. This has been inspiring, informational. It's just been extraordinary. And I've known you now for several years, and we part of a married couples group that you come and advise us at times too. So, and I know you've been talking about this for a while, and so congratulations on accomplishing an incrable feat, 500 miles. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing your story here today. And I hope that others, who are listening are inspired to, and you get out and do that walk as well. So.
And also, to put it in perspective too, about 200 or 300,000 people walk it. So I wasn't the only one walking it. So it's very common. So I might say in 4 or 5 years, 1 million people walk it.
Yeah.
But it was great to be able to do that. To be able to walk, I'm blessed with good health.
Yes.
And it was a great experience. That just to see the goodness of men and women. It's just the kindness and the friendliness of them all. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, guys, if you're tired of your same old family vacation, or your retired yearly vacation, you're just like, been to Disney a bunch of times or something like that. I've never met a person who was like, it was okay. It was like another vacation in Spain. It's always life-changing for people, as you mentioned before. So we appreciate you so much for sharing your time over there and for inspiring. I'm inspired. I was sitting in the car driving back. My lower back was hurting. It's like, am I getting old? Am I going to get old? And then you're over here like, I had a knee replacement. I'm, in my 70s. I did the Camino. So, we have no reason to complain, everybody.
True.
Well, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode with Bishop Bill. Until then, we'll see you then.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. If you would like to know more about our podcast, please visit gaudiumetspes.net or go to ptdiocese.org and click the button that says podcast. If you listen to the audio version from an app such as iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify, be sure and rate, review, and comment. If you watched us on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe or leave us a comment there as well. Thank you for joining us.